Blood dripped from the edge of the mahogany bar, slipping quietly into the shadows. But Camilla did not blink. She simply swallowed the last of her cheap tequila at exactly 2:13 in the morning. She thought she was just another invisible woman drowning a bad day. She had no idea the most dangerous man in Chicago was watching her every move. The neon sign of the Cobalt Lounge buzzed a sickly, flickering blue, casting long, twisted shadows across the wet pavement of Chicago's South Side. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale gin, cigar smoke, and the quiet desperation of people who had nowhere else to be. The lounge was neutral ground, a place where the city's worst people came to drink in an uneasy truce. At table 7, tucked in the darkest corner of the room, sat Gennaro Russo. He was a man made of sharp angles, tailored Italian wool, and cold, uncompromising violence. As the undisputed head of the Russo crime family, men spoke his name in hushed whispers, terrified that simply saying it would summon him from the shadows. He ruled the downtown territories with an iron fist, his reputation built on blood and calculated cruelty. Tonight, he was supposed to be waiting for a shipment from the port, but his dark, calculating eyes were fixed entirely on the woman, sitting alone at the far end of the bar. Camilla Vitali was not the type of woman the underworld usually noticed, nor the type who sought their attention. She was soft where the women of Gennaro's violent world were sharp, carrying the full, generous curves of a plus-size figure that society often tried to overlook. Her thick thighs pressed comfortably against the cracked vinyl of the bar stool, and an oversized faded black sweater had slipped off one shoulder, revealing skin that looked flawless even in the dim, dirty tavern light. To the untrained eye, she was just a lonely woman nursing a drink at an ungodly hour, completely unaware of the predators circling the room. But Gennaro Russo did not have an untrained eye. He saw everything. He watched the fascinating way she moved. There was a deliberate stillness to Camilla, an economy of motion that spoke of deep resilience and constant awareness of her surroundings. She did not fidget with her napkin. She did not scroll aimlessly on her phone. Instead, she watched the tarnished mirrors behind the bar, her dark, intelligent eyes tracking every patron, every hidden exit, every subtle shift in the room's tense atmosphere. At 2:13 in the morning, she raised a heavy glass of tequila to her lips, her expression completely unreadable. The heavy wooden door of the lounge suddenly swung open with a violent crash, letting in a gust of freezing rain, and 3 large men, wearing the dark green colors of a low-level street crew, stumbled in. They were loud, sloppy, heavily drunk, and desperately looking for trouble to prove themselves. The leader of the trio, a large, tattooed man with a badly scarred jaw and dead eyes, immediately spotted Camilla. Seeing a curvy woman sitting alone in the corner, he assumed she was easy prey, a soft target he could intimidate for his own amusement. He swaggered over, trapping her against the edge of the bar, his heavy hands slamming down on the counter on either side of her, caging her in. From the shadows of table 7, Gennaro's lead enforcer shifted his weight, reaching instinctively under his jacket for his weapon, ready to clear the room. But Gennaro held up a single-gloved hand. "Wait!" His silent gesture commanded it. The air around the Mafia Boss crackled with lethal anticipation. He wanted to see what this captivating woman would do. The thug leaned in close, breathing sour whiskey and cheap tobacco into Camilla's face. His voice was a nasty, guttural sneer as he demanded she leave her drink and come outside with him. Camilla did not scream for help. She did not shrink away. She did not show a single ounce of fear the man was trying to pull out of her. Slowly, methodically, she placed her empty shot glass down on the scratched wooden counter, with a calmness that seemed to drop the temperature in the room. She reached over to the bartender's small fruit-cutting board. She did not grab the large serrated knife. Instead, her plump hand closed securely around a small, heavy, solid steel ice pick. Before the large thug could even register her movement, Camilla drove the blunt, heavy handle of the pick directly into the dense cluster of nerves at his collarbone, striking the exact point of vulnerability with terrifying precision. The strike was clinical and perfect. The giant man dropped straight to his knees, his entire right arm instantly going dead at his side, a strangled gasp escaping his throat. Camilla leaned down smoothly, her face mere inches from his sweating forehead, and pressed the razor-sharp metal point of the ice pick precisely against his neck. She spoke in a voice so soft and steady that it carried easily across the sudden, dead silence of the bar. She calmly told him that if his heart rate rose any further from panic, his own pulse would push his artery right into the steel tip. The thug's two companions froze completely, terrified by the cold precision of the soft-spoken woman they had badly underestimated. Camilla held the position for exactly 3 seconds to make sure they understood her. Then she stepped back gracefully, tossed the ice pick onto the bar with a quiet clatter, and threw a crumpled $20 bill next to her glass. She walked out of the lounge and disappeared into the freezing rain without ever looking back, her posture perfectly straight. At table 7, Gennaro Russo felt a dark, consuming fire ignite deep in his chest, a feeling he had never experienced in his 35 years of life. He had spent his entire existence surrounded by trained killers, hardened criminals, and beautiful, empty women, but he had never seen anything as magnificent as the soft, overlooked woman who had just brought a dangerous man to his knees with the grace of a surgeon. He turned to his lieutenant, his voice a low, rough command. "Find out everything about her. Where she sleeps, where she works, what she drinks. She belongs to me now." 3 days later, the criminal underworld of Chicago was violently bleeding out into the streets. Priscilla Marsh, the thin, sharp, and utterly ruthless fixer for a rival Irish-American syndicate, had decided it was finally time to tear the city apart and claim the throne for herself. Priscilla was everything Camilla was not: loud, deeply arrogant, sharp-edged, and completely without a moral compass. She operated from heavily guarded penthouses on the Gold Coast, orchestrating hostile takeovers of Russo territory with a cruel glee that frightened even her own men. Priscilla knew that as long as Gennaro Russo drew breath, her family would never fully control the city's underground ports. So she set a trap, a carefully planned ambush in the desolate meatpacking district, meant to wipe the Russo King off the map forever. The ambush was brutal. Heavy automatic gunfire shattered the midnight quiet, high-caliber rounds tearing through the reinforced steel of Gennaro's armored car. His loyal men went down fighting, trading their lives to buy their boss the precious seconds he needed to escape and vanish into the dark alleys. But Gennaro did not escape unharmed. A stray bullet had torn through his lower right side, missing his vital organs by a fraction, but leaving a deep, bleeding wound. He dragged himself through the rain-soaked, garbage-strewn streets, his vision blurring at the edges. He knew that if he went to any underground syndicate hospital, Priscilla's spies would find him and finish the job while he was helpless. He needed to disappear completely. He needed somewhere no one would ever think to look for a billionaire crime boss. Driven by instinct and fading adrenaline, he ended up miles away in a forgotten working-class neighborhood, ultimately collapsing onto the rusted metal grating of a second-story fire escape as his blood pooled heavily on the iron. He was rapidly losing consciousness, the cold eating into his bones, when the frosted glass window above him rattled and slid open. Camilla Vitali looked down at the massive, bleeding Mafia Boss blocking her fire escape. Even in the poor lighting, she knew exactly who he was. She had seen his sharp, handsome, terrifying face on the news, in the papers, and in the whispered warnings of the desperate people she treated off the books. Camilla was not just a woman who knew how to handle an ice pick. She was a former, highly decorated trauma surgeon who had her medical license unjustly revoked 5 years ago after she refused to let a high-ranking criminal die on her operating table, refusing to compromise her medical oath. Now she lived entirely in the shadows, her brilliant mind and skilled hands serving the desperate, the undocumented, and the forgotten people of the city. Every logical instinct in her brain screamed at her to close the window and lock it tight. Getting involved with Gennaro Russo was a death sentence, especially with someone like Priscilla Marsh actively hunting him. But Camilla's deep, unwavering resilience, her fundamental inability to let a broken, bleeding person die in front of her, quickly overrode her logic. Hauling his massive, unconscious frame through the narrow window was a grueling task, but her body was remarkably strong. Her soft curves hit a core of absolute iron. She dragged his bleeding form onto the faded linoleum floor of her tiny kitchen, her breathing heavy, her mind already shifting into the cold, calculating space of a master surgeon. When Gennaro finally drifted back to consciousness, The first thing he felt was the agonizing sting of a curved needle pulling thread through his torn flesh. The second thing he felt was the cold, heavy barrel of his own gun resting against the center of his forehead. He forced his heavy eyes open. Camilla was leaning directly over him, bathed in the harsh yellow light of the kitchen lamp. Her thick, dark hair was tied back in a practical bun, and her oversized white shirt was heavily stained with his blood. She was stitching his side closed with incredible speed and flawless technique. She held his firearm casually in her left hand, aimed perfectly at his skull, while her right hand finished a complex surgical knot. "Stop moving," she told him, her voice perfectly level, without any panic. "If you tear these deep sutures, you will bleed out on my kitchen floor, and I just mopped it." Gennaro stared up at her. The burning pain in his side was completely eclipsed by the sudden, overwhelming force of his dark fascination. It was the woman from the Cobalt Lounge. Close up, she was even more captivating. A perfect contradiction of softness and steel. He noted the gentle curve of her waist, the natural flush of her cheeks, the warmth of her thick thighs pressing firmly against his side to keep him pinned down. He also noted the unwavering steadiness of her hands. She was not remotely afraid of him. She was holding a loaded gun to the head of the most feared man in the Midwest, and her pulse was practically resting. "You saved my life," he rasped, his voice raw. "I kept a heavy corpse out of my kitchen," she corrected instantly, cleanly cutting the surgical thread and tossing his gun onto the counter with a loud clatter. She stood up to her full height, her curvy frame casting a long, protective shadow over his battered body. "You owe me exactly $300 for the medical supplies and anesthetic, Mr. Russo. Then you need to leave this building before whoever shot you tracks your blood to my front door and forces me to kill them too." Gennaro slowly pushed himself up on one elbow, wincing sharply as his abdominal muscles pulled against the fresh, tight sutures. He looked around the modest, cramped apartment, taking in the cheap furniture and stacks of medical textbooks, then looked back at the breathtaking, plus-size woman who had just casually patched up a mafia boss as if he were a scraped knee. He knew how the underworld worked. He knew Priscilla Marsh would be tearing the city apart block by block to find his body. He knew that the moment Priscilla discovered a rogue underground doctor had saved his life, Camilla would be placed at the top of a rival syndicate's hit list. "I am not going anywhere," Gennaro said softly, a dark, deeply possessive promise lacing his rough words. "And neither are you. You are completely under my protection now, Camilla. The world outside this door is about to burn to ash, and I will personally destroy every single person who tries to bring the fire to you." Camilla crossed her arms over her chest, completely unimpressed by the bleeding Mafia King kneeling on her kitchen floor, making grand declarations. She had survived much worse things than Gennaro Russo, and she had certainly survived worse monsters than Priscilla Marsh. But as she looked deep into Gennaro's obsessive, pitch-black eyes, she realized with a sinking feeling that he was not making an empty threat. He was making a blood vow, and a blood vow from the devil himself was the most dangerous thing a woman living in the shadows could ever receive. The morning sun did little to warm the freezing Chicago streets, but inside Camilla's cramped apartment, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Gennaro Russo had not left. Instead, within an hour of his stabilization, his shadow network had descended on the working-class neighborhood. Massive, heavily armed men in unassuming clothing now occupied the alleyways, the fire escapes, and the corner stores, turning the entire city block into an impenetrable, closely watched fortress. Camilla stood by her tiny stove, brewing bitter espresso, completely ignoring the fact that a billionaire crime boss was currently occupying her worn floral armchair. Gennaro watched her with an intensity bordering on madness. His dark eyes traced the generous curve of her hips hidden beneath her scrub pants, the soft swell of her stomach, and the confident, grounded way she carried herself. In his violent, shallow world, women routinely starved themselves to appear fragile and decorative. Camilla was none of those things. She was substantial, real, and possessed a quiet, dangerous gravity that pulled him in completely. He had spent the remaining hours of the night having his men run her background. He knew everything now. He knew about the brilliant trauma surgeon who sacrificed her prestigious career to maintain her morals. He knew she ran an illegal clinic for those who could not afford normal hospitals, and he knew he would gladly burn the entire city of Chicago to the ground before he let anyone harm a single hair on her head. "You cannot turn my neighborhood into a war zone, Mr. Russo," Camilla stated calmly, walking over and handing him a steaming mug of black coffee. She did not flinch when his large fingers deliberately brushed against her skin, lingering just a second too long. "My patients will be terrified. They already hide from the local police. They do not need the mafia glaring at them from the stairwell." Gennaro took a slow sip, his piercing gaze never leaving her face. "My men are here to ensure you stay breathing, Camilla. Priscilla Marsh is not a rational enemy. She is a rabid dog. By now, her enforcers are aggressively questioning every underground doctor and back alley fixer in the city. It will not take them long to figure out that a ghost surgeon with hands of gold stitched me back together. You are a massive target now. You belong to me, and what is mine is fiercely and heavily guarded." Camilla sighed, shaking her head. She was immune to cheap intimidation, but the sheer, overwhelming possessiveness radiating from Gennaro was an entirely different kind of threat. It was suffocating, yet deeply intoxicating. Before she could formulate a sharp response, the heavy silence of the apartment building was shattered by the distinct, deafening crack of a suppressed sniper rifle echoing from the adjacent rooftop. The armor-piercing bullet ripped through Camilla's kitchen window, shattering the cheap glass and embedding itself deep into the drywall just inches from her head, showering the linoleum in white dust. Gennaro moved with a terrifying, explosive speed that completely defied his fresh, agonizing wound. He lunged across the small space, tackling Camilla to the floor with brute force. His massive body covered her completely, pressing her curves firmly against the floorboards as a second suppressed shot tore through the espresso machine, sending boiling water and ceramic shrapnel flying. He wrapped his powerful arms around her waist, shielding her entirely with his own body, his breathing heavy against her ear. "They found you much faster than I anticipated," Gennaro growled, pulling his gun from his waistband and chambering a round with a sharp click. Camilla did not scream. She did not cry. She simply calculated the angles of the room. "The trajectory came from the east building," she whispered, her cheek pressed against the cold floor, her mind operating with the same ice-cold logic she used in the trauma bay. "There is a blind spot in the alley, directly below the fire escape. If your men can lay down heavy covering fire, we can drop down and access the utility tunnels. I know the blueprints of this entire block." Gennaro looked down at her flushed face, absolutely mesmerized. Any other civilian would be sobbing in hysterics. Camilla was orchestrating a tactical retreat. He keyed his two-way radio, barking harsh orders in rapid Italian. Within seconds, the street below erupted into chaotic, deafening gunfire as his elite men engaged the enemy hit squad. Moving with synchronized precision, Gennaro and Camilla crawled toward the window. Despite his fresh injury, Gennaro was an apex predator in his natural element, but it was Camilla who confidently led the way. She kicked open the fire escape gate, her strong thighs driving her forward as she guided the ruthless Mafia Boss into the damp, lightless utility tunnels beneath the Chicago streets. Priscilla Marsh had just made the gravest mistake of her miserable life. She had forced the undisputed king of the underworld and the city's most brilliant, resilient surgeon into the dark together, giving them the perfect environment to plot her absolute destruction. The subterranean tunnels smelled of rust, stagnant water, and century-old brick. For 2 grueling days, Gennaro and Camilla operated out of a heavily fortified underground safe house near the industrial shipyards. The close proximity was electric, thick with unspoken desire and high-stakes adrenaline. Every time Camilla changed Gennaro's bandages, her hands moving with clinical perfection over his hardened muscles, the dark obsession in his eyes grew significantly deeper. He worshipped her. He treated her body and her brilliant mind with a terrifying devotion, constantly reminding her that she was the only queen fit to rule his violent empire. But Camilla knew that hiding in the shadows was merely delaying the inevitable. Priscilla Marsh was tearing Chicago apart, burning down legitimate businesses and executing innocent civilians in her desperate quest for dominance. "We cannot stay down here forever," Camilla said on the third evening, tracing a detailed map of the industrial shipyards spread across a rusted metal table. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and Gennaro reached out, wrapping a thick strand possessively around his finger. Priscilla operates on pure arrogance. She thinks she is the apex predator because no one has ever had the intellect to set a proper trap for her. We're going to change that tonight. Gennaro smiled, a dark, wicked expression that would have terrified any other soul. Tell me your brilliant plan. Camilla pointed to an abandoned pharmaceutical warehouse on the edge of the docks, a massive building filled with decaying industrial chemical tanks. It is a maze of blind corners and elevated steel walkways. We leak information through a compromised informant that I am fleeing the city by boat tonight, and that you are personally escorting me because you refuse to let me out of your sight. Priscilla will not send her disposable man to finish the job. Her ego is too massive. She will come herself to execute the woman who stole her prize. The trap was set with flawless precision. By midnight, the heavy rain had returned, drumming a relentless beat against the corrugated steel roof of the warehouse. Camilla stood completely alone in the center of the vast, cavernous floor, wearing a dark trench coat that hugged her generous curves. She appeared vulnerable, an isolated piece of bait in a vast, empty cage. But beneath her calm exterior, she was a tightly coiled spring. The heavy steel doors burst open with a violent crash, and Priscilla Marsh walked in, flanked by 6 heavily armed mercenaries. Priscilla herself looked like a venomous viper draped in expensive leather, her sharp, gaunt face twisted into a cruel, triumphant sneer. "Well, well," Priscilla said, her voice dripping with contempt. The little chubby doctor who thought she could play in the deep water with the sharks. "Where's your monstrous guardian angel, Camilla? Did he finally bleed out? Or did he realize you were just too much dead weight to carry?" Camilla stood her ground, her posture immaculate, her face a mask of absolute indifference. She did not shrink under the cruel insults about her body. She knew her worth, and she knew exactly how this night would end. "Gennaro realized I am perfectly capable of taking out the trash myself," Camilla replied, her voice soft, steady, and chillingly confident. Priscilla laughed, a harsh, grating sound, and confidently raised her weapon. But before her finger could even reach the trigger, the vast warehouse descended into absolute darkness. Camilla had seamlessly severed the main breaker grid. Instantly, the mechanical sound of Gennaro Russo's assault rifle echoed from the high catwalks above. He rained precise, calculated fire down upon the mercenaries, dropping 3 of them in the span of 2 seconds. Panic erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the dark in brief, violent bursts. Priscilla, realizing it was a devastating ambush, abandoned her dying men and sprinted forward through the chaotic shadows. She drew a serrated combat knife, determined to end the arrogant doctor herself. But Camilla knew the exact layout of the warehouse in the dark. As Priscilla lunged blindly around a towering stack of wooden pallets, Camilla stepped out smoothly from the flank. She did not use a gun. Instead, using the sheer momentum of Priscilla's own chaotic charge, Camilla grabbed the assassin's wrist with incredible strength, twisting it sharply against the joint until the bone snapped with a sickening, audible crack. Priscilla shrieked in agony, dropping the knife. In one fluid motion, Camilla drove her knee directly into Priscilla's stomach, knocking the air violently from her lungs, and then slammed a specialized syringe filled with a fast-acting surgical paralytic straight into the side of Priscilla's neck. Priscilla crumpled to the cold concrete floor, completely paralyzed from the neck down but entirely conscious, her eyes wide with terror as she stared up at the woman she had so foolishly underestimated. The deafening gunfire ceased. The remaining mercenaries were dead. The backup emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim, red glow across the destruction. Gennaro descended the metal stairs, his dark suit still perfect, his eyes fixed only on Camilla. He stepped casually over the bodies of his fallen enemies and looked down at the paralyzed, thoroughly defeated leader of the rival syndicate. Then he looked at his woman. Camilla stood tall, her chest heaving slightly, possessing an aura of magnificent, unstoppable power. Gennaro walked up to her, cupping her flushed face in his large, blood-stained hands, completely ignoring the destruction surrounding them. "You are the most magnificent creature God ever put on this earth," he murmured, his voice thick with raw devotion. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a fierce, deeply possessive kiss that tasted of adrenaline, rain, and absolute victory. Camilla kissed him back eagerly, finally surrendering to the dark, consuming fire they had ignited in each other. She was no longer an invisible woman drinking tequila in the shadows. She was the undisputed, fiercely protected queen of the Chicago underworld, and the devil himself was on his knees for her. In the weeks that followed, the underworld reshaped itself entirely around the new order Gennaro had established. Priscilla Marsh's remaining territory was absorbed quickly into the Russo family's holdings, her name reduced to a cautionary whisper among the city's remaining criminal factions. No one dared question Gennaro's judgment again, especially not concerning the woman who now stood permanently by his side. Camilla did not abandon her work. She had spent too many years building her underground clinic to walk away from the people who depended on her, and Gennaro, to his own surprise, did not ask her to. Instead, he quietly funneled resources into her practice, upgrading her equipment, securing safer locations, and ensuring the undocumented and desperate patients she treated would never again fear a knock at the door from anyone but her. "You could have anything in this world," Gennaro said one evening, watching her carefully organize a stack of donated medical supplies in her newly secured clinic space. "Any house, any city, any life. And you choose to spend your nights patching up strangers who cannot pay you." Camilla did not look up from her work. "That is exactly why you should trust me, Gennaro. I do not need your money or your empire to feel powerful. I do this because it matters, not because it profits me." Gennaro studied her for a long moment, something soft passing behind his usually calculating eyes. It was, he realized, the exact reason he trusted her more than any person he had ever known in his violent life. She wanted nothing from him that he had not already freely given. 6 months later, the Cobalt Lounge looked exactly the same flickering neon sign, the same suffocating scent of gin and cigar smoke, the same uneasy truce among the city's dangerous men. But Table 7 was different now. It was no longer simply Gennaro Russo's quiet corner. It belonged to both of them. Camilla sat beside him, no longer the invisible woman nursing a drink alone at 2 in the morning. She wore a deep burgundy dress that fit her curves beautifully, chosen not to hide anything but to simply be comfortable, exactly the way she liked. Gennaro's arm rested along the back of the booth behind her, not possessively gripping her the way he once might have out of fear of losing her, but resting easily, the way a man sits beside something he no longer worries about protecting every single second, because the entire city already understood the consequences of trying. Word had spread quickly through every syndicate in Chicago. The soft-spoken doctor with the steady hands was not a weakness in Gennaro Russo's empire. She was its foundation. Enemies who once might have seen her as an easy target now understood exactly what waited for them if they tried. The story of the pharmaceutical warehouse, of the paralyzed rival left twitching on cold concrete, had become its own kind of legend whispered through the underworld, though never confirmed by anyone who valued their life. "You're thinking too hard again," Gennaro murmured, watching the small crease form between her eyebrows as she stared into her glass. "I was thinking about the clinic," Camilla admitted. "We had a family coming last night. 3 kids, no papers, no insurance. The mother was terrified to even knock on the door." "And?" Gennaro asked, though he already knew the answer. He always did. "And I told her she was safe," Camilla said simply. "Because she is. Because you made sure of that." Gennaro reached over, taking her hand in his thumb tracing slowly over her knuckles the way it always did when he wanted her full attention. "I did not build my protection around your clinic because I expect gratitude, Camilla. I built it because it is yours, and everything that belongs to you belongs under my protection, permanently. That will never change, no matter how many years pass." Camilla smiled, the expression soft and genuine, nothing like the guarded stillness she used to wear like armor in this very same bar 6 months earlier. "You know, when I first saw you sitting in this corner, I assumed you were just another dangerous man to avoid." "And now?" Gennaro asked, his dark eyes glinting with quiet amusement. "Now I know you're the only dangerous man in this city I never have to be afraid of," Camilla said, leaning into his shoulder, finally allowing herself the simple comfort of resting against someone who had proven again and again, that her softness had never once been a weakness in his eyes. It had always been the exact thing he valued most. Outside, the rain continued to fall over the Chicago streets, the same relentless rain that had once driven a bleeding mafia boss to her fire escape window. But inside the Cobalt Lounge, at the corner table that now belonged to both of them, Camilla Vitali was no longer hiding in anyone's shadow. She was exactly where she had always deserved to be, seen, valued, and completely unafraid, sitting beside the one man in Chicago's underworld who understood that her quiet strength had never needed his protection to be real. It simply made the two of them, together, absolutely unstoppable.